Good morning, everyone. Glad you could join us for our Bible study Saturday morning session. And we're recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And we welcome you all. And our moderator today is Thomas from New York.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our Bible study. So I'll start out with our quote. Spiritual teaching has a purpose beyond a mere impartation of knowledge. It is intended to start in the individual the resurrection of what is termed in Christian Science spiritual sense, which is the true spiritual nature in man and constitute man's relationship to God as his son. Through it, man understands and reflects him. Hence, the resurrection of spiritual sense in the conscious activity whereby man reflects divine mind is the ultimate objective of all spiritual teaching. And everything in the life of the spiritual teacher and pioneer that will aid the student in resurrecting this God-given quality to the struggle to understand and explain such matters is significant and important. This is from Introduction in Visions of Mary Baker Eddy as recorded by her secretary, Calvin Fry, CSB, by G.C. Carpenter, Jr., CSB.
Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic quote.
Couldn't help but notice that resurrection or resurrecting was used 3 times in this statement to really put forth, obviously, the profound fact that spiritual sense is there with each and every one of us. So it's not like something to be gained or acquired, but to be resurrected.
It says out to me, saying, awake, awake, awake to what you already have.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a difference, because, and certainly in Bible studies, and maybe in other ways too, people think they're just imparting knowledge. That's not what Christian Science is about at all.
That's not what life is about at all.
Yeah. We know the big difference between wisdom and knowledge, which wisdom is from God. So any times we spend together, that is the real purpose of it, is developing your spiritual sense, learning to get your answers from God, not just imparting knowledge. So that's a really good quote. Thank you.
I like the way it indicates when we learn about our leader, when we glean from her life our own spiritual sense. I'm sure it goes for Christ Jesus also.
Yes.
Yeah, because we can't really learn about their life without also learning to appreciate the spiritual sense that guided her in everything that she did.
I don't know of any other religion that talks about spiritual sense, and it's so important. I don't know.
I don't know either. I mean, I think there are some religions that talk about the quote, the spirit world,
Okay.
as being separate from the quote, material world.
And certainly listening to God, listening for God's voice. But, in the glossary, the definition of resurrection, the first is spiritualization of thought. And also, this all reminds me of Mrs. Eddy's definition of church, that institution which affords proof of its utility and is found elevating the race, rousing the dormant understanding from material beliefs to the apprehension of spiritual ideas, and the demonstration of divine science, thereby casting out devils or error and healing the sick. And if you don't do this, you don't have a church. You certainly don't have any teaching in the church.
I think that's why they establishing that or bringing to awareness the primitive Christianity, which involves the healing part, is important in science and how its teachings are. The healing is part of it, of that Christianity.
Yeah, thank you. I so love that in the manual. That is the reason for the church, having a church, she said, to restore primitive Christianity. Primitive.
And that means original, not old-fashioned. It means the true and original.
Yes, what Christ is
to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
And his disciples.
Yeah, Christ's Christianity.
Yes. And those same words were used in the documentary we like to watch at Thanksgiving called The Pilgrims. I guess it was William Brewster, that he wanted to leave England to establish primitive Christianity, which he felt he'd lost there because you had to become a member of the church.
The English,
it was
Anglican
amazing.
Church, yeah.
The level of control that the church had over people's lives. And if you didn't go along with their so-called doctrine,
well,
it was severe.
It's very interesting because I found this note. I didn't bring it today. I'll bring it tomorrow. That Thomas sent me a while ago, and it was from that Charles Evans Hughes, who I believe was a lawyer for Herbert Eustace. He also became he's on the Supreme,
in the Great Litigation.
In the Great Litigation. He was also on the Supreme Court, I believe. I have to check all that before tomorrow. But anyway, in this little thing that Thomas sent me, he says, this guy says he'd never seen a church that was so controlling as the First Church of Christ Scientists, which I found very fascinating. He said they control everything.
And this was in the 19 teens, 18, 19, 20.
Less than 10 years after Mary Baker Eddy passed.
Yes, and it is why he stood up for Herbert Eustace and realized that Mrs. Eddy in no way could have meant for all this control. It's very fascinating. And I don't know, Thomas, if you remember sending me that, but I kept it, and I'm so proud of myself. I've been arranging all my notes into folders.
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Well, anyway.
Well, that's all right. You did a really good thing.
You did. You did, and I thank you, as this quote, too. Thank you, Bruce.
You're welcome. I mean, it really sheds some light on the purpose of the estoppel clauses in the manual.
Yeah.
I mean, we have divine control. We do not have human control, which is always malicious and erring.
And she talked about tending the regulator, and that's
Exactly.
She gave them all the clues she could possibly give them.
She did, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it all boils down to the whole point of Christianity, the whole point of, our life here on earth. The whole point is to have a relationship with our Creator. And and thereby have a good relationship with one another. And our spiritual sense is our relationship with God. And that's why we have to cultivate it. That's why we have to resurrect it. And that's why it's the only thing that really matters.
There can't be a desire to help people resurrect it if you just want to control them anyway. It's best to keep it dead. So,
well, right.
So true. It can't be resurrected if you're under the thumb of human control.
And that's why the Constitution of the United States is such a unique document, because it recognizes the importance of man's individual relationship with God. And it respects it. And it says, in so many words, that the only role of a human government is to protect that relationship.
So important we understand this.
And that's why the human mind rebels against the Constitution of the United States of America.
Yes, it does.
That makes sense.
And that's why we have to be diligent to protect it. Because it's not a human doctrine, it's our relationship with God and the need to protect that relationship. That's why we feel so strongly about Christian Science. It's not a human religion. It's divine. It is God speaking to us. Anyway, thank you, Tom. Good quote.
Yeah, good quote.
We can thank Gilbert Carpenter Jr.
Yes.
Wonderful what he wrote. So this kind of reminded me somewhat about a quote that we often use for our Bible study. As adherents of truth, we take the inspired word of the Bible as our sufficient guide to eternal life. So I thought it was kind of good to start out with what are we trying to accomplish with the Bible studies? And so it was nice the way Gilbert Carpenter sort of encapsulated how we can look at spiritual teaching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's true.
And Calvin Fry for writing it down in the first place.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then, this what he's saying in here, which other people have already said, but, it's about our relationship with God. So we can think about that when we go through our Bible study, that what are we doing to help us better understand and have a relationship with God?
Yes, and I think that's what makes this Bible studies unique to others, where it is just information, but this is much different. And many of you don't know it, but we usually have, 130, 140 people at our Bible study every Saturday, and that much at least at our round table. So we're grateful for those of you who spend this time with us.
I just wanted to say we were talking about government, and I read this yesterday in Retrospection and Introspection by Mrs. Eddy. It is safe to leave with God the government of man. He appoints and he anoints his truth bearers, and God is their sure defense and refuge. That's at the bottom of page 90.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, I think we've had that for our watch at times, but it's a wonderful, simple statement of truth.
Okay, so our topic today is faith, patience, and God's blessings. And so we have in the lesson this week the story of Joseph, and I thought there's so many wonderful things in there. Let's study that story. So hopefully as we go through the questions, we'll see how that relates to faith, patience, and God's blessings. So to start out with, now this may be counterintuitive to what we just went through in the quote, but the first question here is about impartation of knowledge. But I kind of like to do this sometimes because, if we're going to get inspired from the Bible, well, we kind of need to know the Bible. So
Yes.
Our first question is, who were the Ishmaelites?
Ishmael was the son of Hagar and Abraham, who was blessed by God. He sent him off away from Abraham, and he formed ended up forming a nation and of the Ishmaelites. And Hagar was Egyptian also. But anyway, that's where they came from. Their original source was from Ishmael, the son of Hagar and Abraham.
He had 12 children, right?
Yes.
He married an Egyptian woman himself, yeah.
And Betty's an authority on this because she's writing a lesson about it.
Well, and they lived in Arabia, they were nomads, right?
Yeah.
They weren't farmers,
They were traders.
but they were merchants.
Yeah.
They traded. They kind of took whatever they could find.
Yes, they did.
And the Hebrews were kind of prejudiced against them. They were the lower class of the tribes.
Thank you.
Well, God established the covenant with Isaac rather than Ishmael.
Yeah, it's a good thing to understand because this commentary, Carrie sent me a commentary on this, and it ends saying well, they're still having troubles because of this. That's why we know there's none superior or inferior. Leads
Okay,
to
so that's who he established the covenant with. But did God overlook Ishmael?
No,
No,
he
No.
blessed him.
Oh.
no, he cared for him.
Yeah. He cared for Hagar when he,
Yeah.
the well or the water. God's love present with everyone.
everyone. That's right.
So it says here in Genesis chapter 17, verse 20, and as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. And 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation.
What blesses one blesses all.
Yeah. I think if when God blesses or choose someone to bless for the greater good still. So it's not to say then you're superior to others.
Yeah, God is no respecter of persons. He doesn't really care whether we think people are more or less than us.
Thank you. Yeah. And that'll heal all of this.
Well, and what will heal all of this is a recognition that can God do anything less than bless all of his children? I mean, really?
Of course not.
Of course not. Now, this idea that God prefers some over others is nonsense. It's a human theory. But it does appear that those who have a better, closer, stronger relationship with God tend to prosper more, right?
Maybe it's because some are more aware of their closeness to God. Perhaps it's some form of, maybe I'll call it misleading education that, some are less closer to God. That's why some people feel that they can only get to God through a pastor or some spiritual leader or something.
It's very true.
We have human educational processes that limit people, right? Or try anyway.
It's all human, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And a religion of a nation can greatly affect that nation, so-called religion of the nation. And we do find where there's Christianity, there's greater prosperity and enlightenment.
And humanity.
And humanity, because if it's followed, Christ's Christianity, if it's followed. So, but God is no respecter of persons, nor did he ever curse one and bless another.
But those who are miseducated, as Florence pointed out, those who are miseducated would be jealous and rebellious. And and would try to steal the good that others have. Otherwise, make trouble.
And that happened with Joseph and his brothers. They were jealous.
Couldn't even tell them a dream without them getting jealous.
Yeah, no, they just...
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody noticed, but the Ishmaelites were also called Midianites, which kind of confused me. I didn't know what that meant, but so I looked it up. And if anybody has anything to add what I say, that'd be helpful too. So, but apparently they're descended from Midian, the son of Keturah, who was a concubine of Abraham and later became his wife. And then the Ishmaelites are descended, of course, as we said, from Hagar. But the Ishmaelites, a lot of them apparently went and lived with the Midianites. And so then it became that since the Ishmaelites were living with the Midianites, that quite often they were called interchangeably, whether an Ishmaelite or a Midianite.
Thank you for that explanation. Because in the story of
and
Joseph,
as we know, Moses married a Midianite too. So remember that. But go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, in the story of Joseph, in his travels, there were Midianites, and then there were Ishmaelites.
Now the distinction became less and less, I guess, over time.
Yeah.
I read that they also intermarried with Hebrews. Some of them did, the Ishmaelites.
Well, one of the commentaries I read was a takeaway from all this, and that was that you can have the most messed up family history, but good can still come out of it. So.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. Exactly.
No matter what, there's the opportunity to resurrect your spiritual self.
That's
Right.
it.
And it's the spiritual history that matters, not the material history.
Is only real anyway, the spiritual.
That's right. That's why when people dwell on the hit and the material and dwell and think about it and
The
chew on it.
genealogy and
And all
where
the
did all these
injustices that were done.
ancestors come from.
Yeah.
What did they do?
And all
Who
these,
cares?
well, and in the injustices that happened, and think about that instead of thinking about what good has transpired, you really get yourself in a mess when you do that.
So just sort of segueing from that, so our second question is, describe an injustice done to Joseph, and how did he respond?
Well, there were a few, weren't there?
Yeah.
He's envied.
Well, one of the things the first thing I guess what happened was he was thrown into a pit by his brothers. The Bible says he was the son of his old age, Jacob, describing the wisdom that Joseph expressed, and which is why he was given the coat of many colors, why he was loved by his father more than his brothers. It appeared to his brothers to be that way. And so they were jealous and threw him in a pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites, or sold him, and he ended up in Egypt. But then, like was just said, there were many injustices done to him, but that was probably the first one.
Yeah, and when he got to Egypt, he served his master well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And his master recognized that there was something really good and special about him.
He didn't dwell on the past and dwell on being thrown into the pit. He went forward. He didn't look backward. He went forward.
He did, right.
Retaliated.
No, he made good out of a bad situation. He did well.
because he later explained that God sent him to preserve life. This was much later. But like Gary said, the Lord was with him and made him to prosper, and his master saw him. So I guess what I really mean to say is he allowed God to work through him. He was obviously very close to God. Otherwise, he couldn't have interpreted these dreams that others had, and he even gave God credit for all of it. So I guess that's his response. All glory be to God, and allow him to have his way through me. That's how I see it.
Yeah, he whether he knew it or not, he felt he had a life purpose. He felt that his life had a divine mission. And he maintained his closeness. Maybe even his closeness with God may have even grown through, the tribulations that he was put in.
His master's wife lies about him,
Yeah. Yeah. And yet he was honorable.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't let her seduce him.
It didn't sound either that he ever accused her or said, well, she tried to do this to me. I was innocent. He didn't defend himself.
At least it wasn't recorded.
Yeah, like Christ Jesus didn't.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. There is the most beautiful, and I would suggest you all find it. It's a Spurgeon sermon. Maybe some of you have found it, but it's called A Miniature Portrait of Joseph. And I'm telling you, I'd like it on the website, because it starts off with saying that Scripture frequently sums up a man's life in a single sentence. Here is the biography of Joseph sketched by inspiration. Quote, God was with him, unquote. So Stephen testified in his famous speech recorded in Acts. Here is the life story of Abraham. Quote, Abraham believed in God, end quote. Of Moses we read, quote, the man Moses was very meek, end quote. Take a New Testament life such as that of John the Baptist, and you have it in a line. Quote, John did no miracle, but all the things that he spake concerning Jesus were true, end quote. The mere name of John, quote, that disciple whom Jesus loved, end quote, would serve for an epitaph of him. It pictures both the man and his history. It goes on, but it says that Jesus was said that the Lord was with him. That comparison. But then this whole article just goes, I must have mentioned 100 times, all the times, that God was with Joseph and how he loved God. He loved to commune with God. He never complained. He never compromised his values. Everything he did was to honor God, not because he was trying to be a good person, but because he loved God. And he was God-like. The fact that he didn't hate his enemies, the fact that in prison, everywhere he went, well, this goes to another question, but everywhere he went, he did good and blessed people. And he was tried. There's another quote I thought was so good about Joseph, was loved and hated, favored and abused, tempted and trusted, exalted and abased. Yet at no point in the 110-year life of Joseph did he ever seem to get his eyes off God or cease to trust him. Adversity did not harden his character. Prosperity did not ruin him. He was the same in private as in public. He was truly a great man. That sounds like Mrs. Eddy talking about the man of integrity.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is just an incredible story. There are just so many life lessons in each one of these examples, because he was tested at every point. I mean, first with his own family, his own brothers. And I know, I read some commentary saying, well, he was kind of stupid because he told him about the dream and, maybe it was a bit of a show off or something. But Spurgeon didn't say that, and I don't feel that either.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It is ridiculous.
Yeah.
However, the human mind would misinterpret it,
That's
wouldn't
right.
it?
Yeah.
He was only, whatever he did was only an attempt to help his brothers or to alert them. But what a horrible thing, Jeremy.
Well, I just was thinking when you don't have that kind of guile in yourself, when you reach out to people that you think are supposed to be there to like support and love you, and they don't, it's always a shock. So
Yes.
I don't, Joseph wasn't that way, so that he wouldn't have seen that coming.
No, he wasn't. No, and I read somewhere he had to walk like 10 or 15 miles to Shechem or wherever, trying to find his brothers. That's quite a hike.
Yeah. All the way up to Dothan. That's a hike.
Dothan. Yeah. Anyway, and then to be tempted like that too. I mean, in the Spurgeon thing, he says a lot of men would have given into that. I mean, why not, sort of a thing. But why not? It wasn't. He did love his master and was loyal to his master, but he said, how could I betray God? It's God that didn't want to offend. At every point, yes, God was with him. And that Emmanuel, God with us, that I love in Matthew 1, was true of Christ Jesus too.
How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?
Thank you.
Higher moral thought.
That's right. If you have that in you, you could never do that great wickedness.
This in the Spurgeon article you were talking about, and he said he saw God as always with him. So they say often when you're like at work, you'll behave when the boss is around, right. And so we need to think of God is always around. And how could we do that? You would want to do it whether God was there or not. But I just thought that was a helpful analogy to be thinking about your actions and thoughts all the time.
Yes.
Not of studied appearance.
Right, and the man of integrity. And Elsie used to say about her mother, is she here, Elsie?
Yeah.
Well, she would say, go ahead.
I'm here.
Well, that maybe I don't see you doing something, but God knows what you're doing.
We were brought up on that.
And that's a good thing to remember.
It is a good thing. Not long after I first got here, a car drove by and it hit my mirror and smashed my mirror and smashed their mirror too. So the lady came back and we exchanged information. And then the husband came, and he brought the part and helped me replace the mirror. But he was talking about it. He says, God sees what people do. So there was no choice but do the right thing. So I just thought that was really wonderful. And that is the Plainfield area. That's how everybody seems to be here. So.
That's true. I was in the Plainfield area.
That's beautiful.
I really think, through science, one does develop that's a higher moral sense of how to be. So that, for example, I remember when you go to a store and somebody gives you more change than they should, you feel uncomfortable. You got to give it back.
Yes.
Maybe at some other point in my life I wouldn't have, but it feels like it doesn't feel right when you're doing wrong. That's it.
And when you act that way, are principled and honest like that, you will only attract that into your experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's a law and a rule, and I've seen it operate. While on the other hand, if you're dishonest and doing things dishonestly, you will attract that into your experience. So, and at every turn, Joseph did the kind and loving thing. He never hated. He even when he was in the prison, he kept doing the right thing because he was expressing God. He was that close to God. He wasn't even lonely.
And this is what it means to be obedient to God, doesn't it?
Yeah. And not out of duty, but more the love for doing right.
Yeah, you obey what you love. And if you love God, you will obey God. And you will be close to God. And God will be close to you. And that's what life is all about.
So I want to mention one other incident where Joseph helped someone and then they didn't deliver on what they promised. So this was the Chief Butler.
Mm-hmm.
So he interpreted the dream of the Chief Butler, saying that basically he was going to have his position restored, and it was restored. And the Chief Butler said that he would then remember Joseph for what he had done interpreting the dream. But it says here that the Chief Butler forgot Joseph.
Yeah.
Yes.
So think about how Joseph responds to all this. I mean, we talked before about him going to prison, and so he was in prison for 2 years. I mean, I'm thinking, how would I feel if I did nothing wrong and I'm in prison for 2 years? I mean, the emotions I would have, and you start looking for these emotions, and what does he do? He helps people who don't show appreciation for it. But he keeps on doing that.
But look what God does. He puts him in charge of the prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
That's something.
Mm-hmm.
You can't help but notice.
Oh, good. Yes.
Can't help but
So we
notice.
go into question 3 then?
Oh.
Well,
That's cool. No, that's...
just to finish question 2.
Okay, good.
Does God ever stop caring for us
No.
in spite of what we do? In spite of our ingratitude at times? No. Joseph is a good example of God's creation, of manifesting God, of being the image and likeness of God.
Yes. And think about the things he overcame. The first is brother's betrayal, your family betrayal, then being sold into slavery. Okay, he was a slave. Then he had to overcome this huge temptation of Potiphar's wife. And then, as Tom just said, he was thrown into prison. Now, those I just listed, they're like about the, 3 or 4 worst things that can happen to a person, right? And in each case, by his obedience to God, he overcame it. And not only overcame it, he was promoted.
I was thinking he didn't dwell on the temporary, the evil, and the false.
That's right.
And he
Enduring the
didn't,
good and the true.
and he didn't let the injustice ruin his disposition.
Yes.
Right.
He didn't become self-pity or bitter or any of those things that are self-destructive.
He was able to impersonalize the whole thing and not see it as person, but see it as, he had those dreams. He knew God was working in his life. We must all know this. Whatever comes to us for lessons to be learned, and not to get all angry and upset, but to graciously learn the lesson. And you be lifted up out of whatever problem it is.
There was something in the Spurgeon article that you had mentioned, and I'd like to read just a little bit of it. It says, when he was taken away to his master after he was sold to his master's house, and the various duties of his service were allotted to him, the Lord was with Joseph. The house of the Egyptian had never been so pure, so honest, so honored before. Beneath Joseph's charge, it was secretly the temple of his devotion, and manifestly the abode of comfort and confidence. And that the Hebrew slave had a glory of character about him which all perceived, and especially his master, for we read, his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. I just thought that was such a good way of explaining how Joseph dealt with where he was, and he made it the temple of his devotion.
That's beautiful.
Very good. Okay, Tom.
And God also blessed his brothers, even though they had put him in a pit. He brought them to Egypt where they could be fed. So they were blessed. Despite the fact that they did that to their brother, they were also blessed in the end.
It all came round. Anybody else?
Okay. Moving on.
So, question 3. Describe how God blessed people in Joseph's life. And I'll read the verse here that I meant to quote. I typed in the wrong chapter. So this is Genesis chapter 39, verse 5.
Yeah.
You might have looked at chapter 37. So what is Tom thinking? Okay, chapter 39. And it came to pass, from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field.
Just about everybody who lived within 100 miles of Egypt was blessed.
Mm-hmm. He pretty much saved everybody's life because he foresaw what was coming after the 7 years of plenty, and they were ready for the 7 years of lean when they came. But just think about if you started into these 7 years of plenty, how easy it would have been to relax, say life is good, and not prepare. But he had the wisdom and foresight to not fall for that temptation. Some of the worst temptations come when things are good, things are looking good. One of the most dangerous temptations is to let down one's sense of alertness, to release one's sense of resurrected spiritual sense. And when things get good, that's when the temptations come.
Yep, tear or triumph harms. See it in the practice. People, things start getting better. People just start to drift sometimes. And then usually all hell breaks loose. I know, I've done it.
Well, and we've seen that in the history of the Christian Science movement too, haven't we? A lot of people's lives are blessed. They become healthy, wealthy, and then they worship the effect of Christian Science instead of worshiping God.
Well, they become wealthy, but not so wise.
True.
Mm-hmm.
And the thorns grow wilder and choke it all.
Yes, it's a good seed. Yep. Well, it is true. We talked about it, but it was Joseph's diligence in every area, and he was a hard worker. So many people will get a job and they'll do the least possible. And certainly in his circumstances, I mean, he could say, wow, why the heck do I want to help any of these people? I'll just be, just slop around. But he didn't. He did his highest sense of right. He was diligent. And he knew his employer is God, not person. And that would be a hard one to
I'm
do.
sure. Oh, sorry.
No, that's it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sure all those who observed how he conducted himself must have learned humility, the need to trust a supreme power. Maybe they also learned to rejoice whether plenty or less, and to seek blessings in adversities, also to cultivate moral courage. I'm sure anyone who was observing how he lived his life through all this must have learned these things.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good lesson, too, about people complain about not being promoted. God is a promoter, and when you know you work for him, he'll promote you in due time. It might take years, but it'll happen in due time. But you'll be tested, and that you either pass the test or you fail. And if you're going to complain and murmur and carry on, you're failing the tests. But if you, as Joseph, always doing the right thing, eventually you will be promoted.
It's amazing to me coming here and learning the importance of, being faithful in the small things, and just that progression. Like, 7 years, I could not have suddenly taken on 6 new languages. I had to learn along the way and grow to that point, and I'm glad for it. So, thinking of that guy for getting him for 2 years in prison, I think, he must have needed it, because in the end it worked, and it was right. So, yeah, you definitely don't want to promote yourself ahead of time. Don't want to say yes when the real answer is no.
Yeah, and Jeremy's a good example of that, and being promoted and having, he got promoted pretty soon after his wife kicked him out. He lost his job. He was contemplating suicide, and God watched all his actions in those times. He was a good man, and
good in the sense that he was of great use to God.
Yes, he had the characteristics, and he didn't ever resent or hate or anything that I ever knew. And then all of a sudden, wow. So you never know. And it's, as we've talked about it, sometimes the darkest before the greatest light. You just keep going and doing the best you can, doing the very best you can.
I would like to just say on that point, something that's kind of struck me recently is that, there's those things, if you think back on, and like these points where somebody did like a betrayal or it stung or something like that. I think when you're in those situations with mortal mind, that's all that mortal mind will do to you. That's it. Mortal mind will betray you. They will throw you in prison if they can do whatever. Yes. So it's not like it should. It was only a surprise because I didn't know how to handle animal magnetism. So I'm grateful to be here learning that.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. Mortal mind doesn't know better. It doesn't know how to do
no, it's always going to do.
Mrs. Eddy talks about the importance of knowing, like, what mortal mind will do. And so that's another reason that Joseph had to go through all this. He didn't know that his brothers had the capacity to betray him. He didn't know about all this stuff, but he learned, and he was really wise at the end in leading Egypt through all that stuff. So that's pretty spectacular.
That's right. And he couldn't have done that if he had a personal sense of himself or of others.
And whatever he did, he certainly didn't do it because he was trying to be promoted. He did it because, again, it was right by God. He wasn't thinking, if I do this, then I'll get some benefit. He just did it because it was right. And that's what we must always, that is being pure in heart. This commentary lists some of his qualities: pure in heart, diligent. He was tender and sympathetic. He was willing to help his people in charge of him, interpret their dreams, listen to them. And very wise. And in this, Spurgeon said, one of the greatest points of his wisdom was the ability to stay silent at times, and not try to defend himself.
That's a temptation, all right. That trying to avenge yourself. Sometimes, like, really, I have to forgive that. You just want something to happen, but
that's it.
God knows best. His time is always right. So,
yes. There was also, and I wasn't sure where to tuck this in, but it was a very good point that one of the commentaries made. It was about Jacob. When Jacob found out, or he thought that Joseph had been killed, it said he tore his clothes. This was an expression of utter horror and mourning because his beloved son was gone. can't imagine how awful that must have felt. And then it said, this is also a powerful illustration of the principle that if we believe something to be so, it may as well be. Joseph wasn't dead, but as long as Jacob believed he was, as far as Jacob was concerned, Joseph was dead. In the same way, the Christian has, in truth, been set free from sin, but if Satan can persuade us that we are under the tyranny of sin, we may as well be. And when I read that, I thought, because how true that is. We live under this tyranny of what we believe, of our beliefs. And then I thought of in Science and Health on page 386, where Mrs. Eddy says, a blundering dispatch mistakenly announcing the death of a friend occasions the same grief that the friend's real death would bring. You think that your anguish is occasioned by your loss. Another dispatch correcting the mistake heals your grief, and you learn that your suffering was merely the result of your belief. Thus it is with all sorrow, sickness, and death. You will learn at length that there is no cause for grief, and divine wisdom will then be understood. It is error, not truth, that produces all the suffering on earth. It's really interesting. I examined my thought after that because eventually, even if someone does seem to pass on in our experience, eventually you will find out he or she did not. If you think you have some disease and you're going to die of that disease, eventually, sooner or later, you will find out you have not. It's a belief. And Mrs. Eddy, the book is full of these beliefs. But if you believe it to be true, well, it might as well be true. But it isn't. So why come under that tyrannical belief? I just thought that was so helpful.
Yeah, and that is why it is possible. It is possible for us to overcome false beliefs.
Yes. Here now. Why not do it now instead of in the hereafter?
Amen.
Amen. And that's what we're all about. Here. Do it now. And I love this. I gave this out to some people. It was a maybe I don't. Oh yeah, I do have it. It was a calendar statement a while ago, but where Mrs. Eddy says, instead of being bound for the grave, we must know we are on the eternal road of life that has no sense of death. Just remember that. It's just a belief. All of this, beliefs. Don't believe them, and you won't have to come under its tyrannical bossing you around. It's not true. Stand up for your rights.
Thank you for that. It gives new light to the be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Too, so.
Yes.
Well, how long did it take man to realize the world wasn't flat?
Well, that's right. It's just a belief.
Right.
And yet we were subjected to the beliefs.
And I'll bet there were some who knew a long time before that the world wasn't flat, but they just couldn't announce it or publish it or write it down for fear of, the repercussions.
Or they just didn't realize other people thought it was flat because it was so clearly
not. Okay, Tom, we got time for one more question.
Well, I wanted to recap a couple things on these two questions. One, what Mary said about injustices, not to take them personally. And then on the other question on people being blessed, this is in the book on Visions of Mary Baker Eddy, and I'm sure it's elsewhere too, but that there's a distinction between human goodness and divine goodness. So if Joseph focused on human goodness, I'm not sure how that would have blessed everybody, but see, it was divine goodness. So that's not selfish. So what Joseph was doing was not selfish because it was coming from God.
Yes.
Right. And Mrs. Eddy makes the distinction between unselfish and selfless.
Yeah, unselfish.
Joseph was not unselfish either. He was selfless. He did not have a selfhood apart from God.
That's right.
At all.
Yeah, so he was unmoved by all that was done to him. He didn't see it personally. And if he tried to humanly do all this, he would have fell on his face. And human goodness can turn into what?
Hate.
Yeah. Hate and human badness.
In a heartbeat.
Yeah, and it would have. But he was led by God, so he was safe. Thank you.
So in our last question, I wrote this because I think sometimes it's a difficult subject when we start talking about dreams and visions and things like that. And I think an example is that book I mentioned, from Calvin Fry on visions. I mean, the board of directors didn't want people to see that. So this is a difficult topic, I think. But maybe it's not. But so I have this question here. So we read here in Genesis where it says Joseph was called a dreamer. That's quote unquote dreamer. So how should we interpret this?
Well, there were a couple of statements in here that really meant a lot to me, and that's where he interpreted the dreams. In one point, he poses the question, do not interpretations belong to God? In other words, to say, and he interpreted the dreams of the butler and the baker. And later, Pharaoh had his dream. Joseph was called in. And this is absolutely one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible, where Joseph says, it is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. So, to me, that means this dreamer is one who is very close to God and hears him.
Mrs. Eddy talks on page 84 in the textbook about scientific foreseeing. And part of it, I won't read all of it, but part of it says, when sufficiently advanced in science to be in harmony with the truth of being, men become seers and prophets involuntarily, controlled not by demons, spirits, or demigods, but by the one Spirit. It is the prerogative of the ever-present divine mind and of thought which is rapport with this mind to know the past, the present, and the future. Acquaintance with the science of being enables us to commune more largely with the divine mind to foresee and foretell events which concern the universal welfare, to be divinely inspired, need to reach the range of federalist mind. So it's for the universal welfare.
Yes, which his obedience to God enabled him to have. It was a prerogative. I love that in Mrs. Eddy's chapter on spiritualism. So beautiful. He was referred to as a dreamer by whom?
His brethren.
Yeah.
By the mortal mind.
Yeah. And they were mocking him. But that.
So in science, this is not a hard question at all, is it? Because dreams are often the way that God speaks to us. And Joseph knew that God was speaking through dreams or in any other way.
Joseph, aren't dreams just like seeing, where you're seeing what God is showing you? Or sight?
Well, sometimes that can be the case, yes.
God tries to reach us in whatever way he can, and sometimes it does. At night, when your thought is at peace and relaxed, maybe can come to you. So, and when you pray about it, you can interpret it. You will know if it's that type of dream. Not all dreams are that way, but some are. It is so interesting in the Bible how many people had dreams and visions. It's very common. I feel I do at times. We probably all do. You just need to recognize it as a way of God speaking to you.
And Joseph was so close to God, Joseph was so used to hearing God and obeying God that he recognized some of these dreams as God speaking. And, when he told his brothers about the dream that he had, he was telling them because God was speaking to him and to them. They didn't like the message, right? So what did they do?
Went after the
They
messenger.
started it coming true.
Yeah, they started it coming. They got right into operation.
They attacked the messenger and made sure it would come true. Exactly. The same thing with the other dreams.
I think that.
Yeah.
Me. I was just going to say sometimes angels kind of fall into this category as well as as dreams, in that God's thoughts passing to man, and sometimes we see them as dreams, or however God's thoughts are coming to us, and whatever name they go by.
Yes. Yeah. Another way God speaks to us. Many ways. Joanne, you want to say anything?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Bruce?
I'm good.
I don't know. Many times after these Bible sessions, people will say, well, I was going to say this. So if anyone is going to say something, now's the time.
I was actually waiting for that opportunity to say that statement from Joseph. It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace.
Yes, thank you.
That one, to me, is very profound.
And it did. And Joseph happened to be the one who was listening to God speaking to all of them.
Tom.
Well, this is great. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, do you have anything you want to add, Tom?
Oh, well, just think about a topic. I somehow feel good when I look at the topic. I mean, this is about faith and patience and God's blessings.
Yes.
And let's not forget there was a blessing for Ishmael, too, and his descendants. So we're all included, all of us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Very wonderful. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.